My life was a structure of straight lines and right angles. It was a grid I had designed myself, a framework of routine and order built to withstand the unpredictable weather of the world outside. My apartment was the central pillar of this construction, a minimalist sanctuary where everything had its place. The stack of books on the nightstand was always perfectly aligned with the edge. The 3 pens on my desk were arranged by color. The coffee mug was placed on the exact center of its coaster. This was not obsession, I told myself, but control. It was a way to manage the chaos, to keep the frantic, buzzing noise of my own anxiety at a manageable hum. From this quiet, controlled space, I worked as a graphic designer, manipulating pixels and vectors, creating order from digital ether. It was a solitary profession, and I had cultivated a solitary life to match. From my window, which overlooked a small, manicured courtyard, I had a perfect, unobstructed view into the offices of Hawthorne and Finch, a high-end architecture firm. And for the past 8 months, my view, and my carefully curated quiet, had been dominated by one man. His name, I learned from a delivery slip I saw a courier carrying once, was Liam. He was one of the senior architects. He was a structure all his own, built of solid lines and confident angles. Tall, with shoulders that seemed designed to carry more than just the weight of his charcoal wool coats. His hair was the color of dark coffee, with a surprising slash of silver at the temples that caught the afternoon light. He was a study in grounded presence. While his colleagues flitted around with frantic energy, Liam moved with a deliberate calm. He didn't rush. He occupied space with an assurance that I could only envy. I watched him through the glass, a voyeur of competence. I saw him on conference calls, his voice a low rumble I couldn't hear but could almost feel, the deep timbre vibrating through the space between our buildings. I saw him leaning over massive blueprints, his brow furrowed in concentration, a pencil tucked behind his ear. He was tangible, real, a man who built things that would stand against time. I, on the other hand, built things that could be deleted with a single keystroke. He became a fixed point in my daily routine, a silent, unknowing companion. I knew he took his coffee black at 8:15 a.m. from the little artisan shop on the corner, because on the rare mornings I ventured out for my own, I would see him, a solitary figure of warmth against the cool morning air. The scent that clung to him was a mixture of something clean and sharp, like cedarwood soap, and the faint, dusty sweetness of sawdust, as if he'd just come from a construction site. It was a scent that spoke of permanence and creation. The barrier between our worlds felt as solid and impermeable as the brick and glass that separated us. He was a masterpiece in a museum, and I was the quiet guest standing behind the velvet rope, admiring from a safe and respectful distance. He was, for all intents and purposes, a part of a world I could not enter. I saw him once, sitting in that same coffee shop with a woman, laughing. She was elegant and bright, and the way he looked at her confirmed every assumption I had built into the foundations of my fantasy. He wore a simple, unadorned silver band on the ring finger of his right hand, a detail I'd obsessed over. It wasn't a wedding band, not in the traditional sense, but it felt like a symbol nonetheless. A signifier of a life already complete, a world with no room for an observer like me. He was straight. The thought was a flat, simple fact, a cornerstone of the wall I kept between my admiration and the dangerous territory of hope. So I watched. I cataloged the minutiae of his existence as if I were an anthropologist studying a fascinating, exotic specimen. I learned that he rubbed the back of his neck with his left hand when he was stressed, his long fingers pressing into the muscle. I learned that he had a slight, almost imperceptible limp when he was tired at the end of a long day. I learned that when he truly smiled, it wasn't just his mouth. It crinkled the corners of his eyes, transforming his serious face into something boyishly open. This secret inventory of details was my hobby, my quiet obsession. It was safe because he was unattainable. The distance was a law of physics, the glass of my window a physical manifestation of the social and emotional chasm between us. He was an idea, a beautiful piece of art to be appreciated, not a person to be known. It was a lonely kind of admiration, but loneliness was a state I was accustomed to. It was a predictable variable in the equation of my life. Then the storm came. It wasn't just a storm, it was a meteorological siege. The sky turned a bruised purple-gray, and the wind threw sheets of rain against my window with a force that made the glass shudder. It was the kind of storm that felt elemental, a raw display of nature's indifference to human plans. The lights flickered once, twice, and then surrendered completely, plunging my meticulously ordered apartment into a sudden, disorienting darkness. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound, broken only by the howl of the wind and the percussive drumming of the rain. My building's emergency generator sputtered to life with a groan, then died with a pathetic cough. A collective groan echoed through the building from the other tenants. The hours passed. The cold began to seep in, a damp, insidious chill that my blankets couldn't fight. My phone battery dwindled, my connection to the outside world shrinking with each percentage point. My fortress of order had been breached by simple atmospheric pressure. The straight lines of my life had been washed away by the rain, leaving me adrift in a sea of cold and dark. The next afternoon, a notice was slipped under our doors. The paper was damp, the ink slightly blurred. It was from the building management. Due to the catastrophic failure of our generator and the city-wide outage expected to last another 48 hours, an arrangement had been made. Hawthorne and Finch, the architecture firm across the courtyard, had generously offered their office space as a temporary shelter. Their building had a state-of-the-art, independent power system. They had light. They had heat. They had coffee. It was a lifeline. It was a nightmare. The thought of it sent a jolt of pure anxiety through me, more potent than the cold. To leave my space, my sanctuary, and enter his. To be a refugee in his world of competence and control. It felt like a profound violation of the unspoken rules I had lived by. The velvet rope was being cut, the museum glass shattered. I had no choice. The cold in my apartment was becoming unbearable, a physical ache in my bones. With a sense of grim resignation, I packed a bag, my laptop, its charger, a toothbrush, a sleeping bag I hadn't used in a decade. I felt like I was preparing for an expedition into a foreign and hostile land. Stepping into the lobby of his building was like stepping into another dimension. It was bright, warm, and filled with the low, reassuring hum of electricity. The air smelled of clean carpets and that faint, academic scent of paper and ink. And him. The scent of cedarwood was there, subtle but present, the anchor of this strange new reality. Liam was standing in the middle of the lobby, talking to our flustered building manager. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket, just a soft, gray merino wool sweater with the sleeves pushed up to his elbows, revealing strong forearms dusted with dark hair. He was in his element, a calm island in a sea of my displaced, anxious neighbors. He turned, and his eyes met mine. For a split second, I saw a flicker of recognition. It was probably just my imagination, the projection of my own hyper-awareness onto him. He gave a small, professional nod. "Glad you could make it over," he said, his voice that same low, calm rumble I'd imagined, but richer and more textured in person. "We've set up the main conference room. There are power strips and coffee. Find a spot and get comfortable." He gestured down a wide hallway, his manner efficient and kind. He was treating me like any other stranger, which was both a relief and a strange, sharp disappointment. I found a corner in the sprawling conference room, a space dominated by a monolithic mahogany table. Other residents from my building were scattered around, huddled in small groups, their faces illuminated by the blue glow of their phones. I felt exposed, a hermit crab yanked from its shell. I unrolled my sleeping bag, creating a tiny territory of my own, a fragile border against the intrusion of the world. I plugged in my laptop, the small green charging light a beacon of normalcy in the chaos. The air in the room was thick with the scent of him. It wasn't just the cedarwood. It was woven into the fabric of the place itself. It smelled of warm electronics, expensive coffee, and the faint, clean scent of wool. It was the smell of his world, and it was overwhelming. I tried to work, to retreat into the familiar grid of my design software, but I couldn't focus. My senses were on high alert, cataloging every detail of my new surroundings. The quiet click of his keyboard from an adjacent office. The low murmur of his voice as he reassured an elderly woman from my building that yes, the heat would be on all night. He was the center of gravity in this place, and we were all just satellites caught in his orbit. An hour later, a ceramic mug was placed gently on the table beside my laptop. I looked up. It was Liam. He was holding a coffee pot in his other hand. "You look like you need this," he said. His voice was softer now, pitched for our proximity. It vibrated in the small space between us. Up close, I could see the fatigue around his eyes, the fine lines etched at the corners. I could see the texture of his sweater, the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw. He was no longer a museum piece. He was overwhelmingly real. "Thank you," I managed, my own voice sounding thin and reedy. My fingers brushed against his as I took the mug. It was the barest, most fleeting of touches, but it sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated heat through my system. It was like grabbing a live wire. My skin tingled where he had touched it, a phantom warmth that lingered long after he had moved away. The coffee was hot and strong, and I held the mug with both hands, trying to absorb its warmth, trying to calm the frantic, panicked bird that was fluttering in my chest. He had touched me. It was an accident, a meaningless little collision of atoms, but my mind replayed it, analyzed it, magnified it until it felt like a monumental event. Later, as the evening deepened, I struggled to find a working power outlet for my phone. The main strips were all occupied. I saw Liam walking down the hall, and, on a wave of uncharacteristic boldness, I asked if he knew of any others. Yeah, they're all full up out here," he said, rubbing the back of his neck in that familiar way. My heart gave a stupid little lurch. "There's one behind my desk. Come on." He led me into his office. It was a corner space with a massive window that looked directly at my own apartment. The thought made me feel dizzyingly exposed. His desk was a wide expanse of dark wood, covered in neat stacks of paper, architectural models, and rolls of blueprints. It was the organized chaos of a creative mind, so different from my own rigid order. He knelt down behind the desk to untangle a cord. "It's back here," he said, his voice slightly muffled. Bit of a tight squeeze. I knelt beside him, the space between the desk and the wall barely wide enough for us both. My shoulder pressed against his. The heat from his body was immense, a solid, living warmth that seeped through the thin fabric of my shirt. I could smell the wool of his sweater, the clean scent of his skin. I was acutely aware of every millimeter of contact, of the way his arm muscles tensed as he reached for the plug. The world narrowed to this small, confined space, to the sound of his quiet breathing and the overwhelming, terrifying proximity of his body. He plugged in my charger and handed me the end. Our fingers brushed again. This time, I was ready for it, but the shock was no less potent. "There you go," he said, his voice a low rumble right next to my ear. He didn't move away immediately. We were still there, kneeling in the cramped space, our shoulders touching. For a breathless second, I thought he was going to say something else. The moment stretched, thin and taut, humming with a strange energy. Then he shifted, breaking the contact, and stood up. The loss of his warmth was immediate and acute, leaving my side feeling cold and empty. That night, as the office lights were dimmed and my neighbors settled into their makeshift beds, a deeper quiet fell. The hum of the generator was the only constant sound, a mechanical heartbeat for our temporary community. I couldn't sleep. My mind was a high-speed reel of sensory data. The brush of his fingers, the warmth of his shoulder, the low timbre of his voice. I saw a figure standing by the massive floor-to-ceiling window at the end of the hall, a silhouette against the blacked-out city skyline. It was Liam. He was staring out at the darkness, his shoulders slumped slightly. He looked lonely. I walked over, my socked feet silent on the commercial-grade carpet. I stood a few feet away, not wanting to intrude. "I hate this," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of the confident command it held earlier. He didn't turn to look at me. This feeling of things being out of control. My dad, he was a contractor. He always said the foundation is everything. Tonight, it feels like the whole city's foundation just cracked. He was giving me a piece of himself, a small, unvarnished glimpse behind the facade of the capable architect. He was afraid of chaos, just like me. He saw it in cracked foundations and power grids. I saw it in a misplaced book or an unscheduled interruption. But it was the same fear. This shared vulnerability was a bridge across the courtyard, across the chasm I had imagined between us. It made him painfully, beautifully human. My father was an accountant. I heard myself say, my voice softer than I intended. He believed everything could be balanced, put in the right column. I think I inherited that. I'm not good with variables. He finally turned to look at me. In the dim light from the emergency signs, his eyes were dark and searching. He gave me a small, sad smile. "Accountants and contractors," he said. "We're both just trying to build things that won't fall down, I guess." We stood there in a comfortable silence for a long time, two men who built things, watching a world that had temporarily fallen apart. The distance between us had shrunk. It was no longer a vast, uncrossable expanse. It was now just a few feet of carpet, a space filled with a fragile, burgeoning connection. The second night was colder. The building's heating system was struggling to keep up with the sustained demand and the dropping temperatures outside. Most of my neighbors had found other places to go, decamping to the homes of friends or family in parts of the city that had power. By 10 p.m., the vast conference room held only 3 other people, all of them already asleep, their quiet breathing a soft rhythm in the stillness. And me. And Liam. He'd told the others he was staying to keep an eye on things, a justification that felt thin and translucent. I was shivering, a deep, uncontrollable tremor that started in my bones. I had my sleeping bag, but the cold was seeping up from the floor, relentless and invasive. Liam was at his desk, the small lamp casting a warm, golden pool of light around him. He looked up and saw me huddled in my corner, my arms wrapped around myself. "You're freezing," he stated, his voice carrying easily in the quiet. It wasn't a question. He stood up and disappeared into a closet, emerging with a thick, dark gray wool blanket. He walked over and draped it over my shoulders without a word. The wool was heavy and smelled faintly of him, cedarwood and that clean, indefinable Liam scent. It was like being wrapped in his presence. "Thanks," I mumbled, pulling it tighter around me. But even with the blanket, the cold from the floor was a persistent enemy. He watched me for a moment, his expression unreadable. "You can't sleep on that floor," he said finally, his voice low and decisive. "It's like a block of ice. There's a couch in my office. It's not much, but it's small. It'll be warmer in there, away from the main space." My heart began a frantic, heavy thudding against my ribs. My office. The words echoed in the silent space of my mind. It felt like an invitation into the very center of his world. I should have said no. I should have insisted I was fine. It was the sensible, safe thing to do. But the words wouldn't form. I just nodded, a small, jerky movement. He led me back to his office, the one with the window that faced my own. The couch was exactly as he described it. Not much. It was a sleek, modern piece of furniture, more for show than for comfort, and definitely not designed for sleeping. It was short and narrow, upholstered in a dark leather that was cool to the touch. "Here," he said, taking the blanket from my shoulders and spreading it over the couch. "It's better than nothing." He turned to leave, then hesitated at the door. "I'll just be out here, at my desk, if you need anything." I lay down, curling into a tight ball to fit on the narrow cushion. The room was warmer, shielded from the drafts of the larger space, but I was still cold. And I was acutely aware of him, just on the other side of the door, separated only by a pane of glass. After 20 minutes of shivering, I heard the door click open softly. He stood in the doorway, a silhouette against the dim light of the outer office. "This is ridiculous," he said, his voice a low murmur. "We're 2 grown men. Move over." My mind went completely blank. He wasn't asking. He walked over and lay down on the couch behind me, fitting his body along the length of mine. The space was so tight that we were pressed together from shoulder to knee. His chest was a solid wall of heat against my back. He pulled the heavy wool blanket over both of us, creating a small, warm cocoon. My entire nervous system screamed. Every point of contact was a supernova of sensation. The solid weight of his arm resting against my side. The warmth of his legs against mine. The soft puff of his breath against the back of my neck. My meticulously ordered world, my entire internal grid, had not just been disrupted, it had been vaporized. There was only this overwhelming, terrifying, magnificent proximity. We lay there in absolute silence for what felt like an eternity. I didn't dare to breathe, didn't dare to move a muscle. I was certain he could feel the wild, panicked hammering of my heart. I was waiting for him to realize his mistake, to recoil, to make an excuse and leave. But he didn't move. He just lay there, a steady, warm presence at my back, breathing slowly and evenly. Gradually, impossibly, my shivering subsided, replaced by the profound, radiating heat of his body. Hours must have passed. The deep, pre-dawn quiet of the city settled over us. I thought he might have fallen asleep. His breathing was deep and regular. Then, in the darkness, I felt him shift. It was a small, deliberate movement. His hand, which had been resting between our bodies, moved. His fingers found mine, lacing through them with a slow, gentle pressure. It was not an accident. My breath hitched in my throat. This was it, the point of no return. His thumb began to stroke the back of my hand, a tender, repetitive motion that sent waves of shock through my system. It was a quiet question, a silent communication in the dark. My world tilted on its axis. He was awake. He was doing this on purpose. He shifted again, turning his head slightly. His lips were close to my ear, so close I could feel the warmth of his breath. "Is this okay?" he whispered, his voice a ghost of a sound, a fragile thing in the immense quiet. I couldn't speak. The words were trapped in my throat, tangled in a knot of fear and disbelief, and a yearning so sharp it was a physical pain. I managed a nod, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement, but he felt it. He leaned in, the slight rustle of the wool blanket the only sound in the universe. And then his lips touched mine. It wasn't a kiss of passion or demand. It was tentative, soft, a question asked in a language beyond words. It was slow and hesitant, a gentle exploration. It tasted of coffee and sleeplessness and something else, something I couldn't name. It was the most terrifyingly wonderful thing I had ever experienced. My mind, my overthinking, analytical mind, simply shut down. The walls I had spent years building, the carefully constructed defenses, the right angles and straight lines, they all dissolved into nothing. There was no past, no future. There was only the here and now. The warmth of his hand holding mine, the impossibly soft pressure of his lips, and the scent of cedarwood and wool that filled my senses. For the first time in my life, I wasn't observing from behind a velvet rope. I was part of the art. The world came back with a jolt, a series of loud, mechanical clunks from the hallway, followed by the blinding, unwelcome glare of fluorescent lights flooding the office. The power was back. The spell was shattered. We pulled apart as if we'd been burned, scrambling to opposite ends of the small couch. The sudden light felt like an accusation, exposing the impossible intimacy of the moment before. Liam shot to his feet, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. He wouldn't look at me. His face was a mask of what? Regret? Panic. "Looks like things are back to normal," he said, his voice clipped and strained. It was a stranger's voice, devoid of the warmth and vulnerability it had held just moments before. He walked over to his desk and began shuffling papers, a frantic, meaningless activity. The easy warmth that had enveloped us in the dark was gone, replaced by a thick, glacial awkwardness. The air was heavy with unspoken words. I should go," I stammered, gathering the wool blanket, which now felt like stolen property. I folded it clumsily, my hands shaking. "Yeah," he said, still not looking at me. "Right." I practically fled his office, fled the building, without another word. Back in my own apartment, the familiar hum of my refrigerator was the only sound. The lights were on, the digital clock was blinking, everything was as it should be. My order was restored, but I felt more chaotic and untethered than I had in the dark. The anxiety spiral began almost immediately. My mind, now fully rebooted, went into overdrive, replaying the night's events with a brutal, forensic intensity. It was the situation, the storm, the cold, the stress. A moment of shared vulnerability, a primal need for human warmth that had been misinterpreted, that had gone too far. He was straight. He had a wife, or an ex-wife, or a sister he looked at with affection. He was just being kind, and I, in my lonely desperation, had read it as something more. He had offered me warmth, and I had taken everything. He regretted it. The proof was in his clipped tone, his refusal to meet my eye, his frantic paper shuffling. He was embarrassed. He was disgusted. I had not only ruined the fragile, tentative connection we had formed, but I had also made things irrevocably weird. Now I couldn't even have my safe, secret admiration from across the courtyard. I had crossed the velvet rope, touched the art, and set off all the alarms. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. For the next 2 days, I was a prisoner in my own home. I watched from my window, my heart a cold, heavy stone in my gut. I saw him arrive at work, coffee in hand. I saw him at his desk, on the phone, in meetings. He was back to being the man behind the glass. But something was different. He looked tense. I saw him rub the back of his neck constantly. And he never, not once, glanced across the courtyard in my direction. My window, which had once been a portal, was now just a mirror reflecting my own misery. His avoidance was the final, damning piece of evidence. It confirmed my worst fears. I had imagined it all. On the third day, there was a knock on my door. My blood ran cold. I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, who it was. I opened the door, and there he was. Liam. He looked exhausted. The lines around his eyes were deeper than I'd ever seen them. He was wearing a simple black t-shirt and jeans, looking less like a high-powered architect and more like a man carrying an immense weight. "Can I come in?" he asked. His voice was low and rough, as if he hadn't used it in days. I stepped back, my body moving on autopilot. He walked into my pristine living room, a space so antithetical to the messy chaos of the last few days. He looked around, at the aligned books and the perfectly placed coasters, his eyes taking in the rigid order of my world. "We need to talk," he said, finally turning to face me. This was it. The speech. The, "I'm sorry if I gave you the wrong impression," or the "let's just forget this ever happened." I braced myself for the impact, steeling my heart for the inevitable rejection. We sat on my couch, a formal, careful distance between us. He didn't look at me. He stared at his own hands, which were clasped tightly in his lap. "I'm not good at this," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "Any of this." He took a deep breath. That night, in my office, it wasn't the storm. It wasn't the dark or the cold. He paused, and the silence stretched, thick and suffocating. "I've been watching you too," he said, the words so quiet I wasn't sure I'd heard them right. My brain stalled, the gears grinding to a halt. He finally lifted his head, and his eyes met mine. They were filled with a raw, terrifying vulnerability. "From my office window," he clarified. "For months. I see you working late. You're always so focused, so calm. In your space." He gestured vaguely at my apartment. "My life has been a mess. For a while now. And seeing you, this quiet, constant presence across the way, it was grounding. I don't know how to explain it. It was like you were the only thing that was still and made sense." He took another shaky breath. "The woman you saw me with at the coffee shop, that was my sister. My wife and I, we separated over a year ago. The divorce was final 6 months ago. The ring," he said, touching the silver band on his right hand, "is just a habit, a ghost. I didn't know how to exist outside of that life. I felt adrift. And then I started noticing you, and I wanted to know you. When the power went out, I saw it as an opportunity. A stupid, clumsy one. But I had to take it. The foundations of my anxiety, the entire structure of my doubt, crumbled into dust." He wasn't straight. He wasn't regretting it. He had seen me. All this time, I thought I was the only one looking, the silent observer. But he had been looking back. The dam inside me broke. A flood of words, all the things I had kept locked away, came pouring out. "I've been watching you for 8 months, I confessed, the words tasting strange and liberating on my tongue. "I thought you were from another world. Untouchable. I knew what kind of coffee you drank. I knew you rubbed your neck when you were stressed. I thought you were the most competent, confident person I'd ever seen. I thought that kiss was a mistake. Your mistake. That I had somehow tricked you into it." A look of profound relief washed over his face, smoothing the tense lines. "A mistake," he said, a small, incredulous laugh escaping him. "God, no. I was terrified. I've spent the last 3 days convinced that I was the one who misread everything, that I'd taken advantage of the situation and destroyed something, quiet and nice before it even had a chance to start." He closed the distance between us on the couch, the movement slow and deliberate. He reached out and cupped my face, his hands warm and calloused and real. His thumb stroked my cheekbones. "I'm so sorry I ran," he murmured. "When the lights came on, I just panicked. It all became too real, too fast. I didn't know what to do." "Me too," I whispered. And then he kissed me again. This kiss wasn't a question asked in the dark. It was an answer given in the clear light of day. It was sure and deep, a confirmation of every unspoken word, a release of all the anxiety and fear we had both been carrying. It was a kiss of homecoming. It was solid and real, a foundation being laid, stone by stone. We started slowly, cautiously, as if learning a new language. The first step was coffee, not at the busy shop on the corner, but in my apartment. He'd come over in the mornings before work, and we would sit in the quiet, the only sounds the drip of the coffee maker and our own soft-spoken words. He learned that I couldn't function without my first cup. I learned that he liked a ridiculous amount of sugar in his. My apartment, once a sterile fortress of solitude, began to change. His presence was a welcome disruption to my rigid order. A book of poetry he was reading appeared on my perfectly aligned stack. A charcoal pencil he'd been sketching with was left on my desk. A second toothbrush, in a shade of blue that complemented my white one, took up residence in my bathroom. Each new object was a small, quiet declaration, a piece of his life weaving into the fabric of mine. The lines of my grid were softening, becoming more organic, more human. We learned the topography of each other's lives, the hidden landscapes behind the facades we presented to the world. I learned about his strained relationship with his father, the contractor who could build skyscrapers but not a bridge to his own son. He learned about my debilitating anxiety before a client presentation and sat with me, a calm, steady presence, as I practiced my pitch over and over again. He loved old, crackling jazz records. I loved silent, black and white films. We found the beautiful, surprising overlaps. The intimacy between us deepened not in grand gestures, but in the accumulation of small, quiet moments. It was in the way he'd instinctively reach for my hand when we walked down the street. It was in the comfortable silence that could stretch between us as we read in the same room, his feet propped up on my coffee table, a blatant violation of my old rules that now only made me smile. It was in the way he'd look at me from across a room, a private, knowing smile that felt like a secret just for us. One evening, a few months later, another storm rolled in. The wind howled, and the rain beat against the window, a familiar, rhythmic drumming. We were on my couch, tangled together under a blanket, watching an old movie. The lights flickered violently, then died, plunging us once again into darkness. For a heartbeat, we both froze. The memory of that other night, the cold and the fear and the uncertainty, hung in the air between us. Then Liam started to laugh, a low, warm rumble that vibrated through my chest. I started laughing too, a laugh of pure, unadulterated relief. He pulled me closer, his arms a secure anchor in the dark. He buried his face in my hair, his voice a warm murmur against my scalp. "Well," he said, "at least this time we don't have to pretend we're just trying to stay warm." I turned in his arms, finding his lips in the easy, familiar darkness. The kiss was soft and certain. I looked at him, though I could only see the faint outline of his face in the gloom. The man from the window, the museum piece. He was here, in my arms, in my space, in my life. The walls I had so carefully constructed hadn't been for protection. They had been a prison of my own design, keeping me safe, but keeping me entirely alone. All it had taken was a citywide blackout for me to finally see the light, to understand that the greatest risk wasn't letting the world in, it was in keeping it out. The fear of vulnerability was a cold, lonely thing, but the reward for pushing through it, the reward was everything. It was the quiet hum of a shared life, the steady warmth of a hand in mine, a foundation stronger than any concrete or steel, built not on right angles, but on the beautifully messy, unpredictable chaos of love.